I don't think most people have any idea what is going on here.
I mean, people are not going to be sitting in their car for 6 to 7 hours for food at a food pantry if they didn't need it.
I pulled in here at 4 o'clock this morning. The last time we were down here, the line was all the way back to the freeway, all the way back to the parkway.
So the intersection.
I'd say that's close to a mile from right here. I know it is.
When we get our checks, we have to pay bills. And then you got to buy what little you need and what little food stamps you get SNAP. So
$350, something like that. And then after it's over, it went back down to what it was before, about $140. But still, the mayonnaise and everything else stayed high. So it didn't equal out.
This is terrible. So what you just watched, those were people in Hazel Green, Kentucky, waiting in a mile-long line in traffic just to get some food from a food bank following the end of SNAP benefits. Now, the SNAP benefits were extended due to the pandemic, and the Senate has declared, and this president has declared that the pandemic is over because they have the authority to declare the pandemic over. But Danny Blair vividly recalling receiving the letter announcing that his pandemic era benefits to help buy groceries was about to be slashed. Kentucky lawmakers had voted to end the state's health emergency last spring by default, cutting food stamp benefits created to help vulnerable Americans like Blair weather the worst of the COVID-19. Instead of $200 a month, he's gonna get now $30 a month. And it's not just happening in state legislatures. Again, the feds, the Senate, the United States Senate declared that the pandemic was over. And you will hear people, especially in Congress, not all, but some of those elected officials, let me just go ahead and close that up a little bit, walk around and act like it's over, but it's not over. Again, if they were not living in a bubble, and if they took the time to talk to some of the constituents that they're supposed to be representing, they would know that people are still suffering. They were suffering before the pandemic. The pandemic made their suffering deeper, and they're still suffering right now. So throwing people into hunger is a policy choice, just plain and simple. What kind of choices are being made with our tax dollars? The choice to allow people to starve, to be food insecure. It is a policy choice. And quite frankly, it's just really a sin and a shame. It should be a crime to do this. The United States just doesn't get the requisite attention of other nations that starve its people because the land of the free, home of the brave. See, we're not critiqued in the same way that some of these other nations are, but we should be critiqued in that same way, because in this nation, allowing people to starve. You know, Professor Lee, one of my colleagues, Alan, he is the director of PDA. And one of the things he said when I was in California last, we were walking down the street and there was a homeless gentleman, laying on the streets. And he said, you know what? No other species would walk past one of their own in that condition. In other words, we're mammals too, like we're supposed to be the higher order, but others in the animal kingdom would not allow one of theirs to just languish like that without doing something about it. And that really struck me. I mean, that is something that has stuck with me since that conversation. Very vivid. And he's absolutely right. Just walking over people. And I don't mean people just walking down the street every single day. I'm talking about policies that would not allow people to languish in poverty and allow people to be hungry or food insecure. There are a lot of people who do have a roof over their head and they're still food insecure. My family was one of those families once upon a time when I was growing up.
Definitely. As somebody that was born and raised on food stamps, HUD, all the government assistance things you can get, I think that it just speaks volumes of what this country is at. You know what I mean? I think that when I was learning about international relations and I fell in love with thinking about international history, I learned about dynasties and how the rise and fall of dynasties, how they happen, and just how capitalism in this instance, and make it where we out of there. What we know the distinction between humans and animals is animals don't govern their lives by capitalism. They only have their lives dictated by it. Humans, our lives are governed by capitalism and our lives are dictated by capitalism. So we see how we're able to justify, your value of your life is dedicated and predicated off of how much you work. If you don't work, you don't eat, therefore you have no value. If your labor don't have no value, that means you don't have no value. And if you're on the streets poor and you can't eat, that's your fault, nobody else's. And that's really the way in which capitalism is a dehumanizing system, where we're able to victim blame and blame people for their own shortcomings or their own, you know what I'm saying, they own like, tribulations. You see what I'm saying? And just to end it, the world hate poor people. America uniquely hates poor people and loves to monetize the struggles and suffering of poor people at the expense of poor people.
Yeah, they do. I mean, this is really quite stunning. And what is happening in Kentucky, it'd be one thing if it was just happening in Kentucky, not good if it was just happening in Kentucky, but it's not happening just in Kentucky. It's happening nationwide, right? All over the country. Let's put this up. The latest cuts to one of the nation's vital social safety net programs will limit how much food an estimated 31 million Americans will be able to afford each month, testing whether the Biden administration and state leaders can take away assistance without exacerbating a growing food insecurity crisis. No, it's going to exacerbate it, and that reporting is coming from the Washington Post. The pullback of federal supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits is part of a broader effort by the government to unwind some of the billions of dollars spent to help protect jobs or boost incomes for Americans during the pandemic. This makes no sense whatsoever. None. What the feds are doing is illogical. What these states are doing is illogical and it's inhumane. And it should not be able to happen, but it is able to happen. And over the past 18 months, the federal government has halted enhanced unemployment benefits and ended pandemic era child tax credits. It is in the process of rolling back an adjustment to Medicaid that boosted enrollment, putting millions of Americans at risk of losing coverage again, reporting coming from the Washington Post. But meanwhile, Congress comes together passionately to dish out over $1 trillion to the military industrial complex. They cannot help themselves on that. Evidence from research shows that the SNAP participation reduces food insecurity as much as 30% and even more effective among children and those facing very low food insecurity or food security. That is severe. A severe form of food insecurity characterized by disrupted eating patterns and reduced food intake. And we know this is no way for anybody to live. If any of the viewers, if any of you have even suffered through not knowing where your next meal is going to come from, or you know somebody, you know that this is absolutely no way to live. I'm a witness. Professor Lee just said he a witness, and I know plenty of people who are witnesses to just flat out don't have enough food to eat. Shame on America for this.